Welcome to Joce and Belle. I'm Joce, and I am going to go over the debut albums of girl groups. I'm going to place them in two categories. Am I hooked after the first listen, or am I not hooked? And then from the hooked ones, I'm going to see which one is the best debut album from a girl group. There's about 19 on this list, so let's dive on in. The first one, obviously, we're going to hit on is Destiny's Child. Their debut album came out in 1998 and was named after them, Destiny's Child. Members of the group, you know, Beyonce, Kelly Rowland, Lativia, and LaToya. Michelle Williams didn't come in until later. Probably one of the most notable songs on here was No No No. And then one of the songs that really stood out to me was Sail On. Like, that could have been in a movie. It was a beautiful song. So it flowed sonically. It was very even tempoed. And it wasn't as slow as I thought it was going to be. So we are going to be hooked after the first listen. The next one on the list is Little Mix. Full disclosure, I love Little Mix with my whole heart. I'm going to go see them in May in the UK, but this is just based solely off of their first album, not anything that I feel about them now. I've obviously listened to this a million times, but have to go in clear-headed. So their first album was called DNA. It came out in 2012. They had a lot of singles of this, Wings being their lead single. Wings is a beautiful song. I encourage you to listen to it. Their album like hit pretty good in the charts, number 4, number 3 in the US and the UK. It kind of didn't really flow sonically. It was kind of a little all over the place. Overall, they were very much trying to find their sound as a group. When you're coming off of a show, you don't have that time to fully find out what you want to be or who you want to be as an artist and what you want to sound like. And they have really good like uplifting songs, and I am hooked after this, obviously, because they're my number one. Like, I love them with my whole heart, so we're putting them in the hooked group as well. So the next one we have is the Supremes. We're going to go way back into the 60s. It's called Meet the Supremes. Came out in 1962. The most notable member is obviously Diana Ross. They had some singles. Buttered Popcorn was like a real bop. If you want to listen to that album and listen to that song Buttered Popcorn, some of the songs that stood out to me: Who's Loving You, Butter Popcorn, obviously, and then Let Me Go the Right Way. It was very sonically cohesive. It was very chill and like vibey, to use like a modern term, and it was surprisingly jammy. Like, there's a reason why we know the Supremes and we know Diana Ross, and this album was notably the start of the Supremes. Was I hooked after a first listen? I'm gonna say no. It was a very good album. It is a timeless album, but it's not gonna make me want to go listen to their other albums. The Spice Girls are of the UK, probably, arguably, one of the biggest girl bands in the world. Their debut album came out in 1996. It was called Spice. You have Posh, Scary Spice, Sporty Spice, and then Ginger Spice, Baby Spice. Those are the members. The biggest single off of this album, and probably of their career, is Wannabe. Probably one of the best songs out there. I love that song so much. They did have some other singles on their album, Mama, To Become One. That was a pretty good song. It flowed sonically, but it just didn't stand out to me. Like, Wannabe is probably the only song on there that stands alone. It's a okay album, but it's not one that I'm like, let me listen to their other albums, which is weird because they're the Spice Girls, right? Like, I think Wannabe is probably their best song. I haven't gone through their whole discography, but I'm just saying off of this album, but it wasn't really a standout album. So I'm going to put this in not hooked. So the next one we have is The Saturdays. The Saturdays are from the UK as well. Their album came out in 2008. It's kind of like an electronic, dancey kind of vibe pop song, and it was called Chasing Lights. That song is really good off of their album. There's 5 members in their group. They did have like an reality show over here in the US for a while. They just never hit hard in the US. They had some singles. I don't really know too many of these on here. Their album went number 9 on the UK charts. The songs that stood out to me were Keep Her and then Chasing Lights, obviously. It wasn't impressionable. I also wrote it's kind of dated in its sound. Like, you could tell that it came out in the early 2000s. And I feel like something like when I was talking about Diana Ross and the Supremes, while it does sound like the 60s doo-wop and stuff like that, you can still listen to it today and it still is relevant. Like, it's not dated to me. But the Saturdays, their album kind of sound dated. So I'm putting that in not hooked. Moving on to some K-pop. We have BLACKPINK on here. They are arguably the biggest girl group right now, just smashing it on the charts and their tours and their albums. BLACKPINK In Your Arena came out in 2018. One of their hit singles was their lead single. That D song was number 1 in the US digitals on Billboard's chart. One of their songs, Whistle, sounded like an Iggy Azalea, like Iggy Azalea influences on there. I did like the chorus on that one though. The sound though, to me, honestly, it didn't really flow sonically. Like, it was kind of all over the place. Like, they have rap and like spoken word and singing, and it's very like up and down, very fast, but it didn't really like all fit together to me personally. Overall, very fast pace. and it was a short track list. So maybe if there was more songs, I would have gotten a better feel for it. But unfortunately for Blackpink, I was not hooked on this album, sorry. The next one on here is Wilson Phillips. They are from the early 90s and their debut album was called Wilson Phillips. And they came in more so on the lower, slower side of pop, like more singer-songwriter pop. The most notable one off of this album was their single was Hold On, which if you watch Bridesmaids, you've seen it at the end of Bridesmaids, and so that's the song that stood out to me most, obviously because I've heard it before. Their album did flow sonically 100%. It was all sort of the same sound. It wasn't boring or anything, the album. Would I be hooked after a first listen? No, I'm not hooked. I didn't really care to listen to any of their other albums. The next one we have is TLC. Their debut album, Oh, on the TLC Tip, which is a line in one of their songs, came out in 1992. For this album, there were 3 members, T-Boz, Left Eye, and Chili. Their album went number 14 on Billboard. Their song Ain't Too Proud went number 6 on Billboards. So some songs that stood out to me, What About Your Friends, Shock That Monkey, Bad By Myself, Ain't Too Proud to Beg. This TLC I feel like is probably one of the only albums that can sing and rap at the same time and do it well, cohesively within their album. Rolling Stone gave it a 3.5 out of 5 stars. TLC, obviously they have lots of smash hits after this, but after listening to this, like, I like their songs, I like their sound, so I am hooked. Salt-n-Pepa. They came out with their debut album in 1986. It was called Hot, Cool, and Vicious. So the first song, or like the single off of this, the most notable song is going to be Push It, and they remixed this song to make it what it is today. It didn't stand out to me. I wasn't hooked even after listening to Push It or this full album. It wasn't something that I was like, let me go listen to more Salt-n-Pepa albums. Moving on to All Saints. They are a UK girl group. Their debut album, called All Saints, came out in 1997, dancey poppy vibe. They had 4 members in their group. I really don't know too much about All Saints, haven't really heard too much about them. They did do a cover of a Red Hot Chili Peppers song called Under the Bridge. Running through this again, I'm like, All Saints, and then trying to like remember, so it didn't stand out to me, not hooked. On to En Vogue. They are a US based girl group. Their debut album, called Born to Sing, came out in the 1990s, R&B soul vibe. Their hit was Hold On, and it went to number 2 on the US charts. I did like Hold On. I liked their lead single. I liked Part of Me. That was a good slow jam song that had a message to it. They were pretty cohesive in their sound. Rolling Stone gave it a 3 out of 5. I did want to listen to their album a lot because I heard that they were known for their harmonies, so I wanted to hear that in their album, and it didn't really stand out to me. I really would have wished they could have done like an acapella. Maybe that comes on later on some of their other albums. It was a solid album. It just didn't stand out to me, so not hooked. Also, on their intro song Party, it was like really messy. It was like a scene from a movie, so I did not like that at all. XScape, based out of Atlanta, Georgia. Coming from the US, their debut album was called Hummin Comin At Ya in 1993. A lot of these 90s, 80s albums, they had 4 members in their band. A year after it released, it went platinum in the US, so they did really well with their debut album. I like their song called Tonight. It was a really pretty song, and I liked the song, loved the song Understanding. That was a really beautiful song. And it 100% flowed sonically. The sounds were smooth and flowed into each other, so I really enjoyed it. I have noticed when I'm listening through these albums, I like it more when they sing as opposed to like interspersing the singing and the talking, or like not even rapping, because I enjoy the rap part, but more so like if it's going to be a singing song, be a singing song. If it's going to be a rap verse, be a rap verse. Anyway, this album had more of the singing of it, which I think is why I liked it more. And yes, I was hooked after this first listen. I really do want to go listen to more of their albums. So Pussycat Dolls came out with their debut album in 2005 called PCD. It was very much pop. The most notable member to me out of there is obviously Nicole Scherzinger. They had a lot of singles off of this album, Don't Ya probably being the most notable, most heard. Everyone knows Don't Ya. And then Buttons as well. Like, when I was listening to this album, I was like, oh my gosh, I love and know all of these songs. Their whole track list flowed sonically, it went together, and then at the end, there were 3 songs that they did covers of that were like either older songs or songs that came from shows, it sounded like. It was called Right Now, Tainted Love, and Feeling Good. Like, it just messed up the whole album. I don't know why they included them in there. This one's gonna have to be, I'm torn. Hooked or not hooked? We're gonna say hooked because the whole album was good and they have all those hits, and then the only part with those 3 last songs. Let's go way back way back to the 1950s with the Andrews sisters. Their debut album was called Fresh and Fancy Free. I put a little note in here. I couldn't really find their first album that I think they might have done with Bing Cosby, but this album, Fresh and Fancy Free, was one of the ones that they did all by themselves. They didn't have any songs that stood out to me. Overall, they kind of sound like a movie track, like a musical with their instruments, which is beautiful. But am I hooked after a first listen? No. Now let's jump back to the present. It's really hard to find current girl groups, but I did find one, Boys World, who just released an EP last year in 2021, and it was called While You Were Out Pop. They have 5 members in their group. I wasn't really hooked after the first listen, and none of the songs really stood out to me. Now back to the 60s, we're going to go over the Ronettes. They are a US girl group, and their debut album, Presenting the Fabulous Ronettes, featuring Veronica, later known as Ronnie Spector. In 1964 is when this album came out. There were 3 members in that group. Their hits and singles, Be My Baby and then Do I Love You, and then Going to the Chapel. A lot of these songs, weirdly, I knew, and I don't know if that's from Glee or from my mom singing them or just hearing them on movies and TVs. Was I hooked after a first listen? Yes, weirdly enough. A 1964 album got to me. So now for G.R.L. from the US. Their debut album, G.R.L. EP, came out in 2014. They had 4 members in their group. The most notable song is Ugly Heart. I was listening to this album when I was working out, and they had a lot of bops, and like the tempo was so upbeat and like the pace was like happy and jumpy. I could listen to Ugly Heart on repeat because it's such a really good song. And was I hooked after the first listen? Yes, because I think it was so upbeat and it was so just like pure pop. The next one we have is ITZY, another K-pop band. Their debut album, or like their EP, came out in 2020 called ITZY It's Me. They have 5 members in their group. One of their singles was called Wanna Be as well. Didn't really stand out too much to me. Nobody Like You stood out to me though. And then 24 Hours kind of sounded like a kid's bop song, so that was kind of weird. It flowed sonically, yes, because it was all very like sharp sounds and like sharp beats and dancey, but I wasn't really hooked after the first listen just because I think it was so like. And rolling in, last but certainly not least, Fifth Harmony, US girl group. Their debut album came out in 2015. It was a pop album called Reflection. They had 5 members. Their singles were like Boss and Worth It. Boss is a jam. That's a good song. Their album went number 5 on Billboard. This Is How We Roll didn't really fit the album. It was kind of more of a dancey vibe where the rest were like pop. But Everlasting Love was a banger. That song is a beautiful song. Y'all should listen to it. I put it kind of flowed nicely sonically. Yes, it did. But it kind of fell off like the last song. Sugar Mama, We Know, and Going Nowhere, Body Rock. Those songs I feel like didn't fit the album. And I heard some influences, like they were doing a song called like Mariah, and they were singing the do-do-do-do. You know, no. Anyways, and then their song Reflection sounded like Beyonce's Ego song. So it's really hard for me to say yes, I'm hooked, or no, I'm not hooked. But I'm gonna say no just based off of those last songs. They didn't really fit the album. And obviously I've listened to them before and I'm not hooked right now. I would like to say there's one girl group that I don't think has put out a debut album that I really was interested in listening to, which is called Citizen Queen. They have some stuff on YouTube, so if you know if they have an album, if you could put it down below, that would be great. As of right now, I have 8 in the hook. We have to determine who out of these 19 lovely girl groups had the best debut album. Not Little Mix. I love Little Mix, but I know that it's not the best. Destiny's Child, I love their debut album, so that one's in there. XScape, I love them. TLC isn't better than Destiny's Child, so no. Pussycat Dolls, I would love to give this to Pussycat Dolls, but those 3 last songs, the Ronettes had a good album, but like, is it the best debut album? I'm gonna have to take G.R.L out for this, because other than Ugly Heart, there wasn't a song that stood out. It just was very poppy and jammy, so G.R.L is out. So I'm gonna have to take out XScape, although I love them. I really liked the Ronettes. I really did. Am I really hooked on the Ronettes, or is it just because they had like cutesy old songs? Sail On, off of Destiny's Child, I'm telling you. And the Ronettes, I just remembered Going to the Chapel. The best debut album of girl groups out of the 19 that we listened to is going to be Destiny's Child 1998 by Destiny's Child. Give it up for our girl group winners. Join us next Tuesday for another video, and I hope you have a great week.